or its primitive stereo. Let's rapidly go through the early days when you were David Jones.
Mm-hmm. All right, David Jones. I was at art school. I left art school and went to advertising agency as a commercial artist and what they call a junior visualizer. And that was pretty disappointing as a career because I had to work on other people's ideas all the time. And I always wanted to be a painter, but there was no real outlet in advertising for a painter, so I was at odds with that. And in the evenings I was sort of playing tenor saxophone and alto sax with a jazz cum rhythm and blues band. And so I was making enough money at that to stop working, and I started painting during the day instead. And I thought, well, I'll become a painter proper. But of course there's no money in that. I couldn't make any ends meet at all. And playing in the R&B band was definitely giving me an income. And I got attracted to the idea of writing songs after getting bored with playing other people's songs. And I was pushed to the front as a vocalist when the vocalist with that band dropped out ill one night. And I pretty much stayed there from then on. And that's when I started writing songs. But I wanted to present them in a more theatrical manner because I didn't have faith in myself as a rock singer or rhythm and blues singer.
You ever pictured yourself as a Otis Redding or?
No. I dared have daydreams, but that's as far as I got. I never thought that I could really carry it off. Or an Elvis, a white one or a black one. I knew that I didn't have the makeup for it. So I thought I'd start developing characters to perform for me, to give me a screen to sort of work on.
Well, it's theatrical. You mean even from the beginning you were into the theatrical?
I didn't know how it was going to work at that time, and the breakthrough for me artistically was having the chance to join a mime company, and I stayed with that for about 2.5 years. Simultaneously with working in a jazz band and painting and all the other liberal arts, I was very much part of the London Underground at that time, what was called the London Underground. Arts labs, and I don't know whether that phenomena hit America at all, the Arts Laboratory. The sort of communal mixed media centres that were all happening all over England. I guess they probably happened in a different way here, but they actually had a title in England.
Well, did you have any exposure to the stage, to music halls, or anything that?
No, not really. My knowledge of theatre was pretty limited. My education was very much one of my own processes. I read the books I wanted to read rather than stick to any of the school curriculum. My brother was very instrumental in what I read. He was the nearest thing I knew to what I thought a beatnik was, and he turned me on to Kerouac and those people, Cummings and Ginsberg, and really told me that I could go and choose books that I wanted to read. I didn't have to stay with the books that were recommended at school. Nobody really clued me into that. So I became acquisitive as far as literature was concerned, and I started reading anything I could get my hands on. So really I had a very diversified teenagehood, artistically anyway. And it all culminated in the character of Ziggy Stardust, who was the first complete conception of a theatrical character that I could felt that I could really perform with some strength on stage.
But before that, you were recording. You changed your name.
Yes, that was inevitable. The band called the Monkeys started, and Davy Jones was becoming known. I thought, I've got to do something about that pretty fast. So the name Bowie was pretty arbitrary. It was really just about the first name I came across. I really wasn't bothered what I called myself.
Didn't matter, I guess.
No, once I'd chosen it, I thought it was a good name. I thought I could stay with it. It had lots of connotations and cutting edges and knives and sort of a Scots thing behind it, you know.
And then you released, but before Ziggy, you did a couple albums.
A couple of tryout things where I hadn't completely estimated what I was going to do. So they were sort of, they just about held together. The first real conceptual album that I made was The Man Who Sold the World, but it didn't have the very strong outline of Ziggy Stardust. I had Space Oddity before, Ziggy Stardust, of course. but they're all leading up to Ziggy at that time.
Speciality was a hit in...
Yes, it was a major hit in England, and much later on again in America, the years afterwards.
Took a long time for America.
It was released again in England, I think, a year and a half ago, and it was a hit again in England. I mean, it's become one of those dear golden oldies now.
Before Ziggy, didn't you come to America on a whirlwind promotional tour?
Yes, it was a hazardous affair, mostly by Greyhound bus. No expense spared. It was real kitbag stuff. I mean, I had a sort of a knapsack and some very odd clothes in, some of my old stage clothes, and I wore them around. I think just for shock value more than anything else, just to see it. Well, let's plant a bit of pre-Raphaelite England into Akron, Ohio, and see what happens.
Is that a plan for the future? I mean,
I was still biting at the bit about the London Underground, and it was still anything to shake people up days.
well, you mentioned being on the road and Kerouac and all
Yeah.
that, and then you came here and traveled on a Greyhound bus.
Yeah.
Did the pictures in your mind, the images when you read the book, did it clash with what
Oh
you...
yeah. I didn't find the America that I'd read about. I found a different one that I also was intoxicated by. I felt it very magnetic, but it was a different picture to Kerouac's. But of course it had to be, because it was at least a decade apart. He started writing 1948, something like that, and so America had changed considerably by the time I got there. But it was nonetheless still an adventure for me, of course. And there were parts of New York that still had the aroma of what I felt from the Kerouac books. Some of the old cafes were still there and stuff. You know. But I found a whole crop of new people and found out about new underground scenes, like the Velvet Undergrounds and things like that were happening in New York.
Lou Reed, Andy Warhol.
Yeah, yeah.
You produced one and wrote about the other.
Yeah, yeah.
Then came the Ziggy Stardust thing, I guess, in chronological order.
Yeah. And that really set the pattern for my future work. I'd found a very good way to express my songs, and that continued right up, really, until, in one format or another, right up until Station to Station. It was, every time I brought out an album, I would adopt the character of that album and try and personify that thing on stage and change the set accordingly. It would become a complete production. And I would take the character through into interviews as well. I would do many interviews as the character.
That must have taken its toll.
Unbeknown to most of the interviews. I mean, the idea was that I was going to use myself as part of the production, that I didn't want to stop just when I got off the stage. I just took the whole thing. Any time I was in public, I was whoever it was at the time, Ziggy or Aladdin Sane or Thin White Duke or whatever. Yes, it did in America. I mean, Los Angeles. It got to a point where I was totally confused about my own identity and that of my writing. I was disgruntled with the way I was writing. I felt it was not reaping me any fulfillment. And so I physically opened a wardrobe door one day and mentally put in all my characters into the wardrobe and closed the door and locked it and left Los Angeles after I'd been living there for about a year and a half. No, a year, I think. And I haven't been back. I still have the key. I never had the guts to throw the key away. Never know, I might need them again.
Prior to Station to Station.
Yeah, Station to Station was a cry to get back to Europe to try and understand why I'd started writing in the first place. And try and find David Jones again quickly before I got completely off me rocker.
Is that why, in the interviews you've given over the years, for example, that they seem contradictory?
Oh, absolutely. Complete. I mean, each character had his own point of view. So and that was it was adopting all these different points of views and having to believe in them wholeheartedly for just short periods of time, and then suddenly changing horses completely. that was really turning my head about. I thought, well, I've got to get out of being a painting for a bit. I'd been 8 paintings, and my canvas was getting a bit destroyed.
Was this deliberate or was it accidental?
The personal destruction of myself, you mean? That wasn't deliberate.
No, the paintings changing.
Oh yes, I mean that was very much. I still hold that. I mean, I still think of it. If anything, I'm a conceptual artist, and that I myself am. I still think in terms of being a painter, and I think of music as painting. It was my lack of success as a painter which decided me to embrace music and try and make that my oils or my acrylics or whatever. I never really loved rock and roll as a lifestyle. I mean, or love rock and roll for rock and roll's sake. I wanted to use rock and roll as a medium, as one would use paint. And I used the stage and myself as a canvas for it. And I've always seen it in those terms.
But you've never wanted to limit yourself to rock and roll, have you?
Not at all, no. That's why I've always regarded that I've been on the outside of it, rather, a fringe member of it. And I've tried to, especially over the last 2 years, keep myself well away from the circus aspects of rock and roll, which never really appealed to me very much. And the socialite scene and the running around to clubs all the time. And the easiest way of avoiding it was just not to be there. So I took myself right out of it.
Let's go through some of the characters and you can describe them and then we'll move on. Ziggy, I guess, is...
Well, yeah, Ziggy was my Martian messiah who twanged a guitar. I mean, he was a simplistic character. It was... by process of interpretation, he took on so many different facets in other people's eyes. I think that a lot of my writing is fairly... the early writing was very simplistic, but it was insidious enough in its underrhythms, in the textures of the music itself, that it created its own momentum. Ziggy did especially. I mean, he created all kinds of images in the minds of the people that listened to him, and I had so many different interpretations of what he was sent back to me, which I feel is half the fulfillment, is seeing what other people think of the characters that I create.
See how they process them.
Yeah, see how they come back at me. Quite amazing things that people see in them that I never saw.
What did you see?
As I say, I saw him as a very simple form of fairly much, I suppose, unfortunately, like the character Newton in the film that I was to do later on, as somebody who dropped down here, got brought down to our way of thinking, and ended up destroying his own soul.
It's always inevitable.
Which is a pretty sort of, archetype storyline.
But wasn't there a period where the audience, the press, were confusing you and Ziggy?
Oh, of course, that took, even after I'd moved into Aladdin Sane, Aladdin Sane was, he was an extension of Ziggy on one hand, but on the other hand was a more subjective thing. Aladdin was my observations of America, the rock and roll America. Here I was on these great tour circuits, not enjoying it very much, and so inevitably my writing sort of reflected that kind of schizophrenia that I was going through, wanting to be up on a stage performing my songs, but on the other hand not really wanting to be on those planes or those buses at all, with all those strange people, and being basically a fairly quiet person. It was fairly hard to come to terms with. So Aladdin Sane was very much split down the middle.
As it was graphically portrayed.
Yes, again, it's asimplistic.
But the audience didn't want to give up Ziggy, right?
No, it took... No, because it hadn't been put into... I hadn't been able to make it clear at that time that I was intending to change character all the time. Because there hadn't been a rock artist at that time that had played characters. the rock artist always was just what, or would have you believe that he was the same on stage as off stage, and this is me. And I wanted to revolt against that. I wanted to do exactly the opposite.
And of course, the rock artist always tried to say that he was the same as the audience, in a sense.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a bunch of malarkey.
Yes, it is. Yeah. For anybody who wants to stand up in front of 20,000 people is not the average thought. I mean, it's not what everybody would have themselves do.
And you found at that time a lot of kids trying to be Ziggy or Aladdin or...
Yes, yes. And shortly after that period, they started realizing that I was changing my character every time I appeared, because the show looked so different. The persona was very different on stage. You went from sort of very narcissistic Ziggy to eventually the very uptight and wound up thin white Duke, who was the last of the characters.
But it must have been fascinating coming to rock as you did, to see this reaction in the audience. Well,
it was frightening for me because it was of its nature innovative, and I didn't have any great master plan. All I knew is that I had a basic premise, which was to create characters and then play those characters, and create some kind of environment for those characters to live in. So hence the Halloween Jack character in Diamond Dogs. There was the...
Gotta change reel.
Sure.
And then we'll get on to Halloween Jack. We were saying...
The unusual factor as far as audience relationship to the stage artist in that particular era, in the early 70s with Ziggy, was that before that period, the last real lifestyle that had hit England with any great force had been the Stones, really, more than anything else, and Mick and his kind of professed lifestyle, which carried through off stage as well as on stage, it seemed. And it had a continuum. Therefore, it was always comparable. A fan would be able to compare himself at all times, and still can to a certain extent. But with Ziggy, he was there for 1 minute, and then suddenly the lifestyle had been taken away, so there was nothing to follow. It was very odd to see quite a large number of young people following a theatrical character, adopting the stance of a character that didn't exist at all, and a lifestyle that hadn't been created, and developing one of their own. I mean, they told me more about Ziggy. Mm-hmm. They developed their own lifestyle to go with the character of Ziggy, which was quite...
What did they tell you?
And I had to follow them.
What did they tell you?
Well, they'd write and tell me all their communications they had with Mars and stuff, and it got quite far out. It got very bizarre. And I was, by that point, I'd gone through Aladdin and had arrived at Halloween Jack, who was the sort of my early idea of the what's now being termed the blank generation kid, or a Burroughs wild boy, one of the wild boys, a desperado of the cities, and this city in particular was on the sort of a metropolis crumbling sort of thing, very sort of expressionistic thing. And by the time, so Halloween Jack would go on stage, and there was still quite a few Ziggers in the audience, and there was this Puerto Rican guy on stage with funny strides on and big shouldered jackets and with short bottoms and skinny ties, desperate eyes.
That vision of Diamond Dogs, does that still hold true? That apocalyptic?
I think at the moment, of course, I feel it applies more to Europe than it does to America now. One feels the same kind of atmosphere in Europe. There's a terrible, desperate feeling in Europe at the moment. I never took Diamond Dogs to England, actually. It might be interesting to resurrect that show for England and Europe to see what the effect is, because I think it applies very much to Europe now, as I thought it applied to America then. But I can't put the things in proper perspective, really. I'm not far enough away from them all yet. I can never interpret my writing very clearly. A lot of it is so tactile, and it comes from the textures of the environment that I live in, and it comes out as word splashes or fragments. And the picture is formed, but it's I couldn't take any given part and say why it was written. It was just, comes out in a burst and there it is. If I step back from it for a few years, I can then see if it actually had any place at the time that I'd written it. Ziggy, I think, has validity for that period. I still can't see Diamond Dogs in.
It's an interesting concept, Diamond Dogs, that, of course, America's become so docile recently. Compared to that.
Comparatively, yes. And the reverse has happened in Europe, which has now become a sort of an upheaval point.
Which seems
Tumultuous sort of things happening.
It seems to be coming through on Heroes.
Yes, yeah. Again, I'm completely vulnerable to wherever I'm living. You can look at any of my albums and guess which city I was in nearly by the sound of them. I'm so emotionally eclectic. I'll pick up anything that's happening. I'm open to all suggestions.
And this is just a German album. We'll get to that in a minute. But on Diamond Dog, with that vision of the future, which is not exactly the rosiest.
No, it wasn't. It was desperate.
But isn't it odd that people are acclaimed it and are cheering and rocking and rolling?
Yes, I guess that was kind of the most. I mean, if I was supposedly decadent, which I thought ironic, because actually the least decadent person I knew, I think. But Diamond Dogs, that was the most decadent relationship, artist-audience relationship. This terrible, we're gonna die. I mean, it was all. Wow, that was. And that. And then I moved to Los Angeles, which didn't help me. And then that's when the mix-up started happening, with those three characters behind me that wouldn't leave me alone. I was being addressed by people as any one of those three people. People would come at me and talk to me as though I was either Jack or Ziggy or Aladdin Sane. And I hadn't remembered what it was like to be treated as David Jones at all, because there was nobody who knew that I was that as well. So people only referred to me, only had those terms of reference to identify me. So my conversations during the day were quite off the wall with everybody that I met.
The decadence that you mentioned.
It was like if somebody came up to you and said, "Hi, John," and then the next person said, "Hey, Henry, great to see you again," and Charlie, looking good.
They reacted to you as each one of these characters.
Yes, then whoever they had identified with on the albums, they would sort of relate to me. I mean, that's sort of too much a graphic illustration, but it was slightly on that level, especially in Los Angeles with some of the people that were hanging around me there. I mean, it was very much like that.
It was just the image of decadence attracting decadence?
I think a lot of it was in Los Angeles, yeah.
The image of a Martian attracting Martians?
Yeah. Something like that. The original idea of Diamond Dogs, of course, was George Orwell's 1984. And in fact, what I had wanted to do was a sort of a musical version of it. And at one time I had asked permission from Mrs. Orwell, but it wasn't granted. So I had to take it off on a tangent and just produce my own idea of the story without infringing Orwell's too much. I would love to have actually done 1984 as a straightforward production. That would have interested me a lot, but it just became a rock theatre spectacular instead. So I never know what's going to happen to any of my things when I start doing them. They always turn out differently to the way I imagined they were going to.
Well, that's the fun of it.
Hmm?
That would be the fun of it.
Oh yes, I think if one's in a regular format, like a Zeppelin or a whatever, it's much easier to cope with the different albums, and because you have a regular idea of approximately what's going to happen all the time. But for me, I'm always on some kind of just about to touch a tripwire or fall off something. It's like really being on a tightrope all the time.
Yeah. Artists always tell me that the most fun of painting a picture is to see how it comes out.
Oh, sure, yes, yeah. And that's why I can relate rock and roll for me is very much like painting. It really is. It has all the same feels you can build up, especially in recording. You can build a record up just like a painting. You can build up all the textures first, and you have the basic outline, and then you start filling in the shadows and building up the flesh.
You were producing artists for a while too, weren't you?
Yes, yes. I've only recently started doing that again. Iggy Pop was the last one I've started working with. And my next one is later this year. It's a band called Devo, an American band that I rate very highly. I don't know whether you've heard of them at all. Probably not. They're not known at all.
But they shall be. Amata Hoople and Lou Reed.
Yes. I always had great faith in people that were regarded by the majority as nonsensical or absurd. I like theatre of absurd things, anyway. I think that's always been pretty obvious. But I think there's a lot of Dadaist sort of thing, inspiration in some of the stuff I do.
This mystique of decadence, especially around Diamond Dogs,
Yeah.
and press and everything, which you contributed to, I guess, in
Oh yes, to a certain extent. But I think that once the whole thing had started rolling, I mean, it rolled on just out of all proportion to the way I had envisaged it. A lot of it was coupling up what Ziggy had been and then adding that onto Aladdin Sane, and then the combination of that was then added onto the Diamond. So by the time Diamond Dogs had this one great absurd personality.
Did you do anything to discourage that?
It was practically impossible to untangle all the knots. I mean, it was just one great knotted up ball of string as a personality. It's something completely beyond my control, really. It completely snowballed out of all proportion.
You mean this decadent David Bowie character that we read about and was in the magazines, and look what he's done to his hair now, and that sort of thing?
Incredibly disappointing to anybody who had actually known what I was like at the time. I was always a pretty placid person, and I often did disappoint people when they met me, to not, expect me to be, I don't know what, lying on leopard skins and shooting up or something. I don't exactly know what they expected me to be like. But before the Los Angeles period, it got a bit heavy, but most of the time people would say, "Oh, Christ, you are a disappointment. You haven't even got green face under all that makeup."
The pinups came after Diamond Dogs, right?
Yeah.
Was that kind of like
a breathing space? Definite, yes.
Definitely a time of. Did you want?
We have to break.
Drama.
We have to break.
We have to break. Period.
Yeah. Because he's got his next interview, and then meetings. As if you have been together for 1 hour.
Have we really?
Yes, you have.
We've only used a half-hour tape.
Well, you've been together for an hour.
Because we waited for the coffee to come before we started, I guess.
Ah.
I guess so.
Is there time to pick up?
Not really. That I can see at this point. Are you leaving today? Or are you going to be in town for the...
Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow noon.
We can fit it in, if there is space.
Okay. We must do Candy now because she has a plane that she's got to catch.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see what time Candy finishes.
Okay.
All right, and possibly between Candy and Eric, you can do maybe do another 10, 15 more minutes.
Yeah. Which was really just doing a straight Polaroid of exactly what things looked like at the place I was at the time, which was Philadelphia.
Okay, we'll all be fine. David?
Hello.
Leonard.
Yeah. Yes.
And that was the first time you collaborated.
Yes.
It was a subject you both knew about.
Yes.
Elaborate, please.
Yes. Well, I mean, the musical background was an illustration of New York and Philadelphia sound, but the lyrical content was a potpourri of our various manager problems that we both had. And that was one of the most exciting collaborations that I've had. It was brief, but it was very rewarding in more ways than one. I mean, it was a remarkable success in America, which I hadn't envisaged happening to quite such an extent.
It's the album that really broke you on the charts, I mean, in a huge way.
Yes, it did, yes. Because, as I said before, it was much of a Polaroid of what was happening in America, in my eyes, as far as music was concerned.
And they were saying at the time Bowie was going disco, and
I just heard it and I played it. I said, well, this is what it's like here.
Station to Station, next album.
That was when I wanted to get back to Europe. and rediscover new ways of writing. And the Thin White Duke was the expatriate who had to get back home. That's a simple version of that album.
Do you record that there?
No, that was done in America,
Oh.
but it was a call for help to be taken back. And after that, I left America, went back to Europe, and then from there started traveling again.
And you started doing band characters after that, then?
Yes, I was just tailing off Thin White Duke. I played him out for a couple of months, and then sort of cloistered myself up and got involved with Brian Eno, and we started talking about different systems and processes and methods of writing, and went into the studio and started experimenting, and assembled the material that we'd done, called it Low. And it wasn't a concept album as such. It was a lot of experiments.
Yeah, we seemed to pay off on Heroes.
Well, we were so excited with the end result of Low that we knew that we would have to continue working together, and I think we're equally impressed with this album, and there's all possibility that we'll be doing a third one together. In fact, whilst I'm over here, I'm working with Robert Fripp, who was on the last album. I'm working with Fripp on his album in New York.
Mm-hmm. These new records, you're doing a lot with instrumentals. You're playing sax and you're
Yes.
playing with the keyboards, that sort of thing. Is a lot of that coming from Eno?
He gave me the will to go ahead and do it. I don't think I would have done it without somebody to sort of lean on a bit, at least emotionally, and say, shall I do it? Or, I mean, something I've always wanted to do. And he gave me the motivation to continue doing it.
Do I detect a German influence on this album?
Well, you detect a modern music influence. I don't know if it's specifically German. I mean, the German sound, or whatever, which is quite diversified, actually. It's also taken a lot from the American avant-garde, which Steve Reich, Philip Glass. So you also detect a lot of the American avant-garde music sound there as well. George Crumb. There's a lot of influences in the music, not just. But people are generally just aware of the German sound, which really doesn't exist, actually. There's a couple of fairly good artists over there. Early Kraftwerk, tremendous. And Edgar Froese of Tangerine Dream, on his own. His solo albums are quite splendid.
The state of pop today, and
I can't talk about that, really. Carry on, though.
it seems like in a couple areas you were addressing that on Heroes. Were you?
No, I've not had any I couldn't tell you. I don't know what music is being played in the West at the moment. I have no idea whatsoever.
Have you removed yourself entirely from that?
Completely and absolutely. So markedly that I couldn't tell you one album in the album charts. I wouldn't know. I know mine's in this week. That's all I know. My company phoned me up this morning very delightedly and told me that I'd gone in, but I don't have. I take all my references from environments rather than music. In America, it was inevitable that it would become a musical environment to be influenced by, because it plays such an important part in life in America. But in the rest of the world, it doesn't have that importance. It's not stressed like that. So it comes from social situations in other areas, especially in Eastern Europe. There's enough references there to produce so much musical material. Everything from ecstasy to deep depression from those areas, Poland and East Germany, Russia. They provided a lot of the influence on the Low album on side 2.
You're traveling a lot too these days.
Yeah.
More than ever.
Yes, much more than that.
You never really liked to travel before?
Yeah, I have always travelled, I mean, it's, I think I was probably the first rock artist to go through Russia on the Trans-Siberian Express. That was about 4 years ago. I also always spent a lot of time in the East. I like the East a lot. But I've had the touring always got in the way, as they always do. I mean, it's something that one has to do, but I find it arduous touring. I enjoy the first 10 or so performances, and after that I have to grit my teeth a bit to finish the tour.
But the musical influences of traveling, especially you mentioned you were going to Japan.
Yes. Oh, that shows up. As I say, wherever I am, tell where I've been. Moss Garden is straight out of Kyoto, on the last, on Heroes. And Neukölln is for me, sounds like the Turkish quarter of Berlin, what I saw of it.
This metamorphosis into becoming really, is it really one of becoming yourself, going through all this? Is it now that you want to start doing acting, taking on other careers?
Well, yes, that's not exactly true. I don't want to be an actor. I have to act if I'm to direct successfully, which is something I think every artist wants to do, is direct his own film, direct a film. But I've given myself an arbitrary number of films to make under different directors, about 5, I think. I think I picked 5, so I'll stick with 5 for the moment. Of very different kinds of film with very different kinds of directors, and by that time I hope to have assembled enough experience to launch into making some kind of film as a director. I don't want to pursue a career as a film actor.
What do you want to pursue? Directing, obviously.
I don't have biting ambitions at the moment. I lead a very happy life. I'm not without. Emotionally, I'm pretty happy and stable at the moment. I have a good time with my son. I travel to all the countries I've ever wanted to go to, and I can come back and be a temporary rock star every now and again. And I can record with people whose company I enjoy working with. No real ambitions at all.
But you're a fan. You seem to have cooled down.
Drastically.
What did that for you?
Los Angeles.
I mean,
I reached my pinnacle of madness in Los Angeles, and that was a breaking point for me. And somebody pulled me out of it, or drew my attention to the state of my particular nation in there, and turned me around and gave me a push and said, "Go home and sort yourself out." So
who did that? You?
Somebody, a friend of mine.
Oh.
No, I couldn't have done that without. I've also seen too many people who don't have somebody around them who's got the nerve to tell them that, which is unfortunate. I think we lose a lot of people that way as well.
Especially in your position right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have an opportunity for that kind of perspective.
Right.
So much of what you did earlier, I don't know if it was deliberate shock value because you were playing characters, but you don't have that need anymore, do you?
No, I'm rather disinterested in the idea of theatre rock to that extent. I've been doing it for a long time now, and I've created quite a few characters, and as I said, I became bored with my writing style.
So you're more into pure music now?
I think I'm still into re-evaluation of exactly what I want to write. I mean, when I embarked on these records with Eno, I thought it was a question of doing 1 or 2 and then finding a new musical language and then moving on to something else. But I'm getting so much enjoyment just with the experiment of creating new ways of writing. That in itself has become something for me to really get involved with. I thought this would lead on immediately to the next step, but this is apparently the next step, which is exciting. I never expected it to be this fulfilling. Just doing things from such diverse angles in the studio, not knowing anything about what we're going to record before we start, and then having exciting results played back to us after it's all finished, not quite understanding it all, frankly. I mean, but it's a very pleasurable experience to listen to.
That man's apparently a mathematical whiz when it comes to music.
Brian?
Yes.
He is quite splendid. He approaches music from an area that is most peculiar to me. And a lot of it has to do with cybernetics and the science of systems and whatever. And then we'll juxtapose different methods of writing together and write pieces of music, not telling each other our statements and combining them. I still don't know half of what Brian was thinking about when he was writing his bits, and then he doesn't know what I was thinking about when I was writing my bits. And so when we combine the two ideas, we get inevitably a third piece of information that we didn't know was there. And then, so we sit back and listen and think, my God, listen to what we've recorded.
And of course you're free now from this pressure to top yourself, aren't you?
Well, to come up with, I don't know about top, because the characters were so different every time, that there was. I don't think there was ever one who sort of. I don't think it sort of went like that. I just see them all as little milestones during that period of the 70s. Each one sort of measured the atmosphere of that time. And sort of the fairly good. I feel that I encapsulated what was happening through my eyes at that particular year.
Are you still doing that?
I think this music applies as well. Yes.
In what way?
That the reference term heroes that seems to be happening all over the place at one given time. It's a kind of synchronicity that occurs often. I find when I'm working with just tactile feelings about what's going on around me, and inevitably suddenly we have a film called Heroes. There's another band who produced an album called No More Heroes. The word heroes has suddenly presented itself at the very time that I have cut myself off from having anything to do with heroes or personalities or characters. And so it seemed to me that there was some validity in this music to describe the situation at the moment, which seems to be devoid of heroes. Probably for the better.
The world is devoid of heroes.
Yes.
Yeah. Especially.
So we now have a music that I'm involved in at the moment that doesn't have heroes. It doesn't have very strong sort of ego attachments to it, or assertments of particular philosophies or lifestyles. It's a sort of an environmental feel.
I see. Gee, what else can I ask you about? All of a sudden I went blank. I think the pressure of the moment. Gee, you could tell me about Kenya. Because you were telling me about elephants last night going extinct.
Yeah, well, there's one elephant called Jambo that definitely isn't extinct. That was the one that broke the water mains in the one of the lodges that I was staying at about 3 o'clock in the morning. With a great rumbling coming through the jungle, and this great enormous thing came out and just broke all the water mains, and so we had no water there at all. He had lived there before the lodge was put up, and he regarded it as his home, and he broke all the windows in the kitchen and just put his trunk in and took all the food. We had to fly stuff in the charter plane.
Simpler pleasures now.
That's not a simple pleasure.
No,
It was the most grueling experience I've undergone for ages. I mean, it's very exciting, but it's not a relaxing experience. Very stimulating. I mean, to see that land and go and see the people who live there and how they live. Going out to the Maasai village was one of the most exciting things I've ever done. Actually coming face to face with a tribe that's been living its own lifestyle like that for goodness knows how many, well, at least 800 years without any form of change, and still being greeted with bows and arrows and spears. I mean, it's absolutely, it's like going back in time. I mean, it's quite incredible. And they don't even speak Swahili, let alone English. I mean, they just speak Maasai.
This new musical stance gives you much more freedom, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
You can now circulate more and.
Yes, it's not as restrictive in one was tending to get a sort of a blinkered outlook by being involved with these particular American cities, and only a particular section of that city. It was very hard to escape that eternal rock and roll circus area of a city, and so it was restricting my writing incredibly, and I had to break out of that.
So becoming a hero, you had to become a non-hero yourself.
Absolutely. But not to be a hero, though, but to carry on writing, definitely.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To carry on writing with any validity, I had to widen my vision a bit more than, I felt it being, I was really feeling cramped.
Fascinating. Really great career. I think that'll cover almost everything.
I hope so.
Actually, really, we can go on forever, but so much seems to be in the past.
Yes, it's quite a tangle in there somewhere.
Quite a tangle, yes. The statements you made that the medium is the message, that you were being the medium, that sort of thing, that's gone now.
I think it's played itself out to an extent, yeah. I think I have no idea what I'm entering into. I really don't. I think that's part of the excitement of it. Then. So.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch and see what.
I'd be watching as well.
Thank you. Great. Quick and to the point.